Texas Senate candidate James Talarico recently echoed Joe Biden's infamous claim that no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. Now, on the surface, that may sound reasonable to some people. In fact, many people hear it and think, well, sure, there have to be some limits. But what you're about to see is why that statement is one of the most dangerous ideas ever introduced into modern constitutional debate. Because if no amendment is absolute, then who decides where your rights end? Politicians, bureaucrats, judges, government agencies? Today I'm going to show you why this argument doesn't just threaten the Second Amendment. It threatens the entire Bill of Rights. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why America's founders would have viewed this mindset as a direct threat to liberty itself and may very well have taken up arms again. Stick around, because the examples we're about to walk through expose exactly how dangerous this way of thinking really is. The real purpose of the Bill of Rights. Before we talk about gun control, let's talk about the Constitution itself. One of the biggest misunderstandings in America today is the belief that government grants rights. It does not. The founders never believed that. The Constitution doesn't create your freedoms. The Constitution recognizes freedoms you already possess. The Bill of Rights was written for one reason: to tell government what it cannot do. Think about that. The First Amendment doesn't give you free speech. It prohibits government from restricting it. The Fourth Amendment doesn't give you privacy. It protects it. The Second Amendment doesn't create the right to keep and bear arms. It recognizes and protects a right that already exists, a pre-existing right. The entire structure of the Constitution assumes government power is dangerous unless it is restrained. That's why the founders wrote limits on government, not limits on citizens. The moment politicians begin arguing that constitutional protections are flexible, negotiable, or subject to changing political opinions, you've fundamentally changed the relationship between citizens and government. Rights become permissions, and permissions can be revoked. What the government giveth, the government will taketh away. Let's apply their logic to other amendments. Taking James Talarico's argument seriously for a moment. No amendment is absolute. Okay, let's see where that takes us. Let's move to the 13th Amendment, the amendment that abolished slavery. Imagine a politician standing at a podium and saying, I support the 13th Amendment, but no amendment is absolute. Would anyone ever accept that? Of course not. Americans immediately understand that freedom from slavery isn't negotiable. There is no acceptable level of slavery. Move to the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote. Imagine hearing this: I support women's voting rights, but no amendment is absolute. What would that mean? Women can vote sometimes? Women need government permission? Women must pass a test? Women need approval from a state agency? No one would tolerate that argument, ever, because we understand voting is a right. Yet somehow, many politicians who would never apply this logic to voting rights or civil rights are perfectly comfortable applying it to your Second Amendment rights. That's not consistency, that's political convenience. The reason anti-gun politicians constantly use this argument is simple. The Second Amendment limits government power in a unique way. Unlike every other right, it preserves the citizen's ability to resist tyranny. The founders had just fought a revolution against a government that believed it should have more control over the people. They understood human nature. They understood power. And they understood that governments throughout history rarely surrender authority voluntarily. That's why they wrote, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Notice they didn't write, unless politicians think it's necessary. They didn't write, unless public opinion changes. They didn't write, unless a Senate candidate decides otherwise. They wrote exactly what they meant, because they understood something many modern politicians have forgotten. An armed citizenry is not a threat to freedom. It's one of freedom's greatest safeguards. You see, the slope is never as steep as you think. History teaches a simple lesson. Rights are rarely taken all at once. They disappear gradually. One restriction, one exception, one emergency, one temporary measure, one compromise, and then another, and another, until people wake up one day and realize the freedom they once possessed exists only on paper. Sound familiar? Every government expansion begins with the same argument. We just need a little more authority. It's for your safety. Every infringement begins with the claim that rights must give way to public safety. Every abuse of power begins with someone insisting government knows best. That's why the founders created constitutional limits, not because government was always evil, but because government is always government. And power always seeks more power. This debate isn't really about James Talarico, and it isn't really about Joe Biden. It's about a philosophy that says government should determine the scope of your freedoms. The founders rejected that idea. The Constitution they wrote rejects that idea. And every American who values liberty should reject it too. Because the moment government decides which rights matter and which rights don't, freedom becomes temporary or disappears. Remember, no right is absolute. The question isn't whether politicians will stop with one right. History shows they never do. The real question is this: if no amendment is absolute, which one are you willing to lose first? I'm Mark Walters for Armed American Radio. If you believe freedom is worth defending, hit subscribe, leave a comment, share this video, and help us keep this conversation alive. Because once rights become permissions, liberty is dead.